If you're looking into building a NAS or network attached storage and realize how expensive a pre-built system can be, but you don't really have the money to shell out for one yourself, you're not alone. I found myself in the same situation, and I decided to build my own DIY NAS using both new and secondhand components. This guide will walk you through my process from gathering the necessary parts to set up TrueNAS and provide a budget-friendly option for reliable storage. That being said, let's gather the components I found and put together my DIY NAS. For this build, I mainly used components I already had laying around, which are pretty outdated for today's standards. Starting off with the processor, we're using an AMD Ryzen 3 1200. It's pretty outdated, but it will get the job done. This is paired with an M320 chipset motherboard. To cool the processor, we're going to be using the default cooler, which does a good enough job for this type of build. Additionally, I was going to use a single stick of 8 gigs of RAM, but I also had a pair of Vengeance 4 sticks laying around, so I ended up using these instead. The last main component is the power supply. I pulled a 400 watt power supply out of a pre-built system. It will get the job done, though I do plan on upgrading it later on. For the hard drives, I picked up 6 4TB enterprise drives. Enterprise drives are pretty cheap and basically barely used, so they are highly recommend if you're going for a mass storage NAS. We also need an SSD or hard drive to install TrueNAS. Some people even use USBs to run their operating system. In my case, I'm going to use a 200 or 320 gig Western Digital hard drive that was probably pulled out of some random laptop. Now that we have the main components laid out, we need something to put them in. I recommend picking up either an old PC case, something you might find at your parents' house, or Facebook Marketplace that has a large number of hard drive bays. In my case, I already had a PC case laying around. The only issue with the PC case, besides some of the rust, is that it does not have enough hard drive bays. So I decided to 3D print my own hard drive bays, and they turned out pretty good. Once I started assembling everything, I ran into a couple problems. The first problem is that the processor I'm using is a first generation Ryzen, so it did not come with integrated graphics. So I had to pick up an external graphic card to use in the NAS. I ended up using an R7750 that I had laying around. The second problem I ran into is the motherboard I'm using does not have enough SATA connections. So I had to pick up an external SATA card, but this led into another issue. The graphic card takes up my only PCIe 16 slot, so all that is left around are a bunch of 1X slots. They will get the job done, but they are nowhere near as fast as using a PCIe X16. After finding a solution to these problems, everything else was flawless. I got the NAS put together, all the hard drives are working flawlessly, and everything sounds good. Now we just need to install our operating system. For our operating system, we will be using TrueNAS, which is completely free and pretty straightforward. I just want to add a disclaimer. I'm not very knowledgeable about TrueNAS or building a NAS. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, and if you want a better tutorial and more in-depth information, I would definitely recommend checking out Hardware Haven. He has a lot of videos about NASs, so I highly recommend checking them out if you want more in-depth information and ideas. That being said, let's get into installing the TrueNAS. You will need a USB drive to install TrueNAS. Once you find a USB drive, go ahead and plug it into your computer. Next, go to TrueNAS's website. When you get to the website, on the top right, there will be a green square that says Get TrueNAS. You want to download TrueNAS Scale. This is the Linux version of TrueNAS. Then scroll down to the bottom and click No Thank You. I already have signed up. By clicking this, you don't have to sign up anything, you just download the TrueNAS Scale. At the top left of the screen, it will say TrueNAS Scale Download. Go ahead and click on that green icon to download TrueNAS. While that is downloading, we need to download the next thing, Rufus. We need Rufus to install TrueNAS onto our DIY NAS. Once you get to Rufus's website, scroll down to the download section and download the newest version of Rufus. Then once it's downloaded, go ahead and open Rufus. Under device, it should automatically recognize your flash drive. Under boot selection, make sure it's set to disk or ISO image. Then on the right, if you hit select, find your TrueNAS download and select it. Then you should be able to hit the start button. This will take a few minutes to create the installable OS. Once Rufus is done installing, you can unplug your drive and plug it into your NAS. Once you have the USB plugged in, go ahead and turn on your NAS. It might take a few minutes, but eventually you will be greeted by the TrueNAS scale install screen. I want to mention I had to change some of my BIOS settings on my motherboard. Specifically, I had to turn on Allow USB Install. This allows you to install any OS using a USB. Most motherboards default this to be on, but some do not. After hitting start, the install process will display a bunch of code, but you can just ignore it. If everything goes correctly, you will be greeted with the TrueNAS scale console setup. This gives you a couple of options: install/upgrade, reboot system, and shut down. We want to go with install/upgrade. Once you have clicked that, it should bring up a secondary screen for which hard drive you want to install TrueNAS on. For me, I'm going to be using my Western Digital hard drive. Once that drive is selected, it will warn you about losing all your data on that drive. Go ahead and hit yes, because it's going to have to reformat that drive to install TrueNAS. The next step is the web UI setup. You want to use the very top one for admin. Once you have clicked that, it will prompt you to create a password to access your NAS. After creating your password, you're pretty much done. Let the system reboot and it will display a bunch of code. And then it will change to a blue screen saying that TrueNAS was successfully installed. And then it will reboot again. It will display a bunch of code like it did earlier. And then eventually you will see a screen with the HTTP address, which is how you're going to access your TrueNAS on your computer. After this point, we don't need to touch our NAS again. Everything else is done on your computer. Now, head to your browser of choice and type in the HTTP address that the NAS server has given you. It should bring up the TrueNAS scale login screen. The username should be admin and the password is the one you created earlier. This will log you in. Our next step is to lock down the IP address for our NAS. Your router has already given you a personalized IP address for the server. You just need to make sure it doesn't change. We can always access it in the same way. You need to head to your router settings and go to the DHCP server. Look at the addresses that the router has given. You should find the NAS under TrueNAS. There should be a way to save the IP address. For me, I just typed it in as a reserved IP address and we're good to go. Now go back to TrueNAS scale and go to a local group. Click add group, make sure the GID is 3000 and the name of the group is whatever you want. Click submit and hit save. Our next step is to create a user. Go to your local user and click add. This will bring up the identification screen and you can create an account and put in the full name of the server and create a password. Make sure your UID is 3000 and add the user that you created earlier to your group. Once that's done, go ahead and save our user. Our next step is to create a data pool. I do want to mention again, I'm not very knowledgeable about TrueNAS. There's always better ways to do everything I show you in this video, and there's always better people that can teach you. But that being said, go ahead and already create a data pool. I'm naming mine Cubs pool. The next step is to select the RAID type. For example, RAID Z1 allows you to lose one hard drive and you should be okay, while RAID Z2 allows you to lose 2 hard drives and you should be okay. The same thing for RAIDs 3. If you lose 3 hard drives, your NAS is completely fine, you don't lose any data. I'm gonna go with RAID Z2 for more redundancy and still giving me this 18 terabytes of storage to access. Then select the hard drives you will be using. I'm using my 6 4TB hard drives, which show up as 3.64 terabytes each. Then select the weight and number of hard drives you want to use, then save the data pool. The next steps are to make the NAS appear as a hard drive on your computer. This uses a protocol called iSCSI. Click on storage and you will be greeted by the dashboard. Click on manage data sets, then create a name for your data set. For example, I named mine Cubs pool share and I set the dataset preset to SMB, then save. Go back into dashboard and hit edit HCL and add an item. Click on who and select a group. For the group, select the one you created, which in my case is Cubs, and at the bottom under presets, give full control to the data group. This makes it so we can access this whole data group from our computer's file explorer. Next, go to your file explorer and open networks. Your NAS should appear in the network. Click on it, which would bring up the login page. Use the name of your data group, mine was Cubs, and the password you created. It should show up as Cubs pool share. Go ahead and click on it. Our next step is to go back into the storage management datasets, hit add zvile, give it a name, allocate 750 gigs of storage, and then hit save. After I recorded the script, I forgot one important detail. We have to go back to TrueNAS and set up the iSCSI wizard in the share section. Go ahead and click on iSCSI wizard. Go ahead and put a name down for your iSCSI wizard. External type, put as drive. Then for drives, click on the Cub pool share. Well, that's the one I created, the 750 gigabyte share. And then click on the sharing platform as, I'm gonna say 4K external video, and go ahead and hit next. Then for port, say create new one. And then the second one, just put none. And you can pretty much save the iSCSI wizard from here. Our next step is to go to Windows search and type in iSCSI Internet Protocol. Once that loads up, type in the address in the target area and your NAS should appear there. If it doesn't, we must have messed up something or we did not turn the protocol on in TrueNAS. Now, if that works correctly, the hard drive won't appear, but we still need to format it before it will. Our last step is to go to Disk Manager and set up our hard drives, go ahead and format them, and then we're all good to go. Pretty much after that, your NAS is all good. You don't really have to do too much more. You can definitely go back in and add special protocols like clean and have the NAS clean itself or backup data to a cloud server. I'm not going to do this because I'm going to rely on the redundancy of running RAID, but if you do have the access to update it to cloud, I definitely would, just to make sure the data doesn't ever get lost. The other reason why I went with this style of server or NAS is that I wanted to be able to pull footage from it at any time and be able to edit off of it at the same time. So I do plan on giving it a better CPU so I can have that true 16x slot to be able to have the full speed of the hard drives. The last couple of problems I ran into with my NAS was due to my own error while setting up everything, and I was keeping the NAS running the whole time. I realized the hard drives were getting quite hot. This case did not come with front fans, so I ended up picking some front fans off Amazon and a fan controller. I spent a bit of time installing them, but once they were installed, my hard drive's temperatures dropped by almost 20 Fahrenheit and 10 Celsius. After that, you're pretty much set up. There are a couple extra things we can do and go through and change, but I don't really want to go too far in depth about these because I don't really know how to work TrueNAS. Most of what I've learned is just from other YouTube videos and a bunch of forums, and of course TrueNAS's website. There are a bunch of different tutorials online of how to install TrueNAS, but I was just trying to show you the basics of how to get it to work and install it. There was also a bunch of problems I ran into while installing TrueNAS, like how everybody on YouTube uses root to log into the NAS, while mine was under admin. This was quite annoying, but once I figured it out, it worked fine. The other problem was when I was installing TrueNAS into the NAS, it just would not recognize the USB. Again, this was due to the BIOS settings I had to change. A lot of these errors and mistakes were definitely my fault, but everything else turned out flawless. The NAS works fantastic. I've been stress testing it and using it every day since I created it, and there are some upgrades I want to make later on, and one is definitely getting rid of that graphics card and changing the processor to something with integrated graphics. By doing that, it will open up that PCI 16 slot, allowing me to buy an external card that can fully use the transfer rate, enabling my drives to fully use the 6 gig transfer for that SATA connection. And I do plan on upgrading my power supply later on as well to something like 650 or an 800 watt gold rating power supply. Outside of that, those are the only upgrades I plan on doing. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was the cost. So let's break it down. The processor, if you bought off eBay, goes for $20. The motherboard I bought brand new off Newegg for 74 bucks. The GPU, if you bought it off eBay, I would not, it would cost you $20. The expansion card was $10 off Amazon. The fans and fan controller together off Amazon were 20 bucks. The case, if you bought it brand new, was 50. I got it on sale for 30, so I'm just gonna go with the 50 price. The hard drives for all 6 cost me $348. The power supply was $40 if you bought it off eBay. So the total price was $458. Honestly, not too bad. I think this is a pretty good build for a budget NAS, considering that most of the money went into the hard drives. Buying a pre-built NAS or NAS case from Amazon could cost you anywhere from $170 to $2,000. So for around $400 to have a working NAS with 18 terabytes free of storage, I think this is a pretty good deal. Building a DIY NAS can seem quite daunting, but with the right components and a bit of patience, it's quite easy. While there is always potential upgrades to make, such as upgrading the processor and power supply, my budget build works very well. I'll keep you updated on the future developments, and if you're interested in seeing more of the process, check out my short form content. It documents some of the build process and some of the issues I came across. That being said, I'm gonna end the video here. If you liked it or had any suggestions, please leave it in the comment below, and have a good one.